Dring, dring.
Hi, you're through
Okay, Joe's.
to Joe,
Hi, Joe. It's Maria. Remember me?
vaguely.
I'm calling you because basically I think we should do a podcast about my favorite director, Richard Linklater.
Hmm. I can't say I'm the biggest fan.
Well, I don't
The
really care. Let's still do it. That should be the whole premise.
whole premise is just we watch Richard Linklater films,
Yes, and I love every movie he makes, and you bash every movie he makes. What do you think about it?
but you don't like Dazed and Confused, and I like Dazed and Confused.
But in reality, I was only lying to you.
Think before, Linklater. There we go. Huh? What? Direct to DVD. Hello and welcome to Think Before Linklater, the podcast where we talk about the films of Richard Linklater, smoking yesterday's weed and thinking tomorrow's philosophies. Um, Still not sure on that one. Today we are talking about Before Sunrise, his fourth, because don't forget he did that one about plowing fields and reading books that nobody has ever seen.
But you're obsessed with.
It's important. We're building
Yeah.
up a picture of the man very slowly. Before Sunrise,
Hmm.
a romance film, not comedy in any aspect, really, set in
Absolutely.
Vienna. Gotta give him
And
props, first of all, because he realized that you don't have to set a film in Texas, and
yes.
women can write films as well. So he had a co-writer on this.
And because of that, we finally have a fully established dimensional female character.
So I'd argue the reason she's more developed is because there are only really two characters in this film. So there's a
Hmm.
lot more
Hmm.
time dedicated to them and getting into their heads.
And the whole premise is romance. So in this case, it is male, female. So you would need to make her lovable as much as you need to make him lovable.
I
So
think
that
neither of them
means,
are lovable.
oof, okay. I completely disagree, but okay.
The first time I watched it, I remembered that there was some kind of like accident or the train was cancelled or something and they had to spend the night in Vienna. And then watching it
No.
again, it's like he just says, "Hey, let's get off the train." And she's like, "Yeah, whatever."
So there is a whole interview I saw with Ethan Hawke where he explains how they needed to come up with a reason as to why Celine would actually come off the train to spend the night with basically a stranger, and they kept going back and forth, and ultimately it was Julie Delpy, the actress, was like, "No, this is the only reason." And it's basically him telling her, imagine yourself in 20, 30 years' time when you're with your husband and you're looking back at your life. And this could be one of those moments. And maybe those moments will make the boredom of the mundane more durable. So
Does that work? Do
that's
you think that would work on a real, actual human woman?
so
If he didn't look like Ethan Hawke, I think it's different if you
I
do look
can,
like
I
Ethan
can.
Hawke.
So that is one part of it. Ethan Hawke looks like Ethan Hawke. Reality is, when I first saw it, probably in my late 20s, I remember thinking I would never do that. I would never. Even if I really clicked with someone, I would still be too afraid to do that. But then I remember they're probably in their early 20s. And yes, in my early 20s, I was for that specific reason.
They didn't talk for very long, did they? He does the little time travel bit, which maybe is a line. You think he's tried that before and had varying
Yeah.
degrees of success, or do you think this is genuinely coming up with it in the moment kind of thing?
Honestly, I think it is generally coming up with it in the moment, purely because, first of all, the premise of the movie is us getting to know these characters while they're getting to know each other. So, because of that, I'm inclined to not make any assumptions further to what I'm seeing. But also, I feel like they have established such a connection from immediately that they do bring out these kinds of conversations from one another, which they wouldn't have had with anyone else.
Yeah, I mean
Personally.
he's so deep, man. He pitches this TV show about just following someone. He basically pitches the movie Slacker. It's like kind of Richard Linklater going, guys, Slacker's good. Slacker's a good idea. You guys didn't like it, but it's a good idea. And I'm gonna get a
It's
really
basically,
attractive man to say it
it's
too.
actually him pitching reality TV. before reality TV was a thing.
I don't know if that is a clever idea to come up with, or if it's just what everyone kind of thought of once cameras became so readily
Yeah, so
available.
accessible. I mean, the reality, I think it's not about what he's saying, but the
But
connection
how
that they're building
deep he is.
because of. Do you want to explain the premise of the movie?
They're on a train. He's like,
That
get
is,
off this train with me and wander around Vienna. I've got a flight tomorrow. Can't afford a hotel. Let's just wander around the city all night. She's like, oh, Ethan, Jesse, James, of course. I'm gonna do that with you. I'm
oh,
gonna walk around the city. And then they walk around except in a French
stop.
accent. And then they wander around Vienna all night, and in the morning they part ways.
And basically, the whole movie is them going from one activity to the other
Not
before
even really
sunrise.
activities because it's kind of late, so everything's shut. So they just kind of bump into people and
But the reality, it felt like 4 or 5 dates all meshed
mm,
into one. I mean, I have literally a list of all the things that they did in that hour and 41 minutes.
maybe in Malta that's 4 or 5 days worth of things, but you just walk through the center of
Hey,
Manchester in half an hour, you'll have twice as much of that happening to you.
sure. My issue with the movie has always been how did they fit all of that within those hours? Because if you take me to a bar, I'm spending there 3 hours minimum.
Well, they're
For me, it was
broke, I
like,
think. That adds to it. They
yeah,
can't really
yeah,
afford
yeah,
to
they
stay in
can't
one
stay
place.
anywhere.
Well, he's broke. I
Uh,
don't think we ever find out how. Well, she's a student, so I guess she's not like loaded.
mhm.
But
But then she does go to the Sorbonne, which is a very expensive school.
and the beauty of the film is in these little conversations they have, these little insights into each of their personalities. They make Vienna look like a very beautiful, beautiful
Yeah,
place to be. I've never been
I've been. And I've
because of this
been,
film, dare I
yes.
ask?
Yes,
Really?
yes.
Oh
As
my
in, I,
Lord.
I love traveling and I've been to a lot of places. But as soon as I decided I'm going to Vienna, don't I'm going to actually where they spent the entirety of the movie. And I love this movie. I will say that from the get-go. It's one of my favorite movies ever. So I did romanticize Vienna before and I went and to be fair, it's a beautiful city
Did you
too.
do like a walking tour of all the different locations they go to?
No, no, I wasn't that fast, but I did go to a couple of those places, and also the same atmosphere is there everywhere. That like slow, maybe I romanticize my life a lot when I'm on holiday, and I was on my own. But I did feel like it was my own first and only solo trip, but I still felt like I was in a romantic movie. But yeah, I did feel that kind of European walking around, not really having anywhere to go.
It does feel very European as a city. I got a kind of similar feeling in Amsterdam in a way. It's just
Yeah.
kind of sleepy, wandering about, seeing different things. I did actually go
Hmm.
to a cemetery in Milan, a really big cemetery, and that was
Hmm.
that was quite interesting. So
Yeah.
I like the appeal of going to where all the dead people live.
I mean, I've recently been to Rome and I did stop at a cemetery. I like doing that too. If it has some kind of history or significance, you learn a lot. And there tends to be smaller, quieter places in a big chaotic city. But anyway, I'm not here to promote cemeteries.
I don't think either of us are, to be honest.
But going back to what you were saying, I think they have these intimate, small conversations, but they're not small in the sense they're learning about each other, but they're not learning about their day to day. No one talks about work or what they're studying or who their friends are. They're learning about each other, sharing of ideas and dreams and beliefs and philosophies. And that I think creates a lot more intimacy. And you see that immediately, which is part of the beauty of this movie.
They kind of know there's a time limit to the amount of time they have together, and so that makes every second precious
Mhm.
and important and imbues this meaning into it. And so they end up having
Hmm.
some pretty deep conversations. Ethan Hawke's kind of cynical, but there's a
Hmm.
kind of touch of romanticism underneath all of that
Yeah.
in a very
Mm.
American kind of way. And she's
Yes.
comes across as more taken up
Romantic,
with
idealistic.
things, but it's kind of
Hmm.
like she's a realist as well. She's not
Yes.
fully like fantasizing.
I mean, when I look at her character and compare her to his character, she's probably more in tune with who she is than she is. So he's more of a cynic, but in reality, she's probably more confident about what she wants and how she will achieve things in life. He's still daydreaming about where his life is at. But I think that the cynicism versus romanticism happens throughout the movie.
Yes, there are a number of times where I'm thinking specifically about the palm reader and the guy who
Hmm.
writes the poem. I guess there was a kind of similar thing in Slacker where the woman gives the person a Coke and then they have this argument about like, oh, that's not going to help him. And she's like, no, it's just a nice thing to do. I know
Uh-huh.
it's not going to change his life. It's the same
Hmm.
thing with the palm reader and the poem where he's like, oh, you pre-wrote that poem and just slipped the word in. And she goes, yeah, maybe, but it doesn't matter, does it? It's still a nice thing,
It's a
regardless.
meaningful thing, and even if it's not like meaningful in the altruistic sense, Stelling still gets something out of it. She is romantic enough to enjoy the moment, even if she knows that it's not going to be actually true or beneficial in the long run. She still is enthralled in that idea of having her fortune told or having a poem written, and which is, I think, probably a very European thing. Of we are very cynical most of the time.
And there are various arguments that have been made about how much of it was tailored to the actors and improvised, and how much of it was written in
Hmm.
the script. I
Hmm.
think the actors have said, "Oh, we improvised most of it," and then the writers have come back and said, well, they didn't really, maybe in the later ones, but in this first one, it was basically all written.
Uh-huh.
Either way, it's
Maybe,
it's very good casting, and they really fit those
yes.
characters, and they do seem believable as
Hmm.
real three-dimensional human beings.
Yes, I think it was a very long casting process until they got to those two. And I mean, they're both beautiful people that, I mean, they take up all the screen time. So they needed to be something pleasant to look at. And both you end up staring at their faces because they're so beautiful. But there's also like some kind of innocence that they portray. I remember the first time I saw it, I remember really liking the character of Jessie and thinking that she is kind of a bit of a brat. Now I think it's the opposite. But I love the casting. I think the chemistry Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy have is magical. I mean that if they didn't have that, there wouldn't be a movie.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine this film if they had zero chemistry with each other, and it would pretty much
Yeah.
all fall apart, wouldn't it?
Yes.
It's the whole point.
Mm. There
Even
is that one
the
particular.
little bit characters seem like the kind of weird Europeans that you just meet walking down the
Yeah.
street as well. Like
Yeah.
the homeless poet very much kind of embodies that character with his crumpled suit and his kind of
Hmm.
straw hair, and the
And saying
bartender with
goes,
the weird
yeah.
kind of melty face.
Going back to the chemistry, there is that particular scene in the record shop, which is basically there's no there's very little dialogue, but they're looking at each other and it's the music. So sweet. And that's where you see it. Like Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy makes sense on screen.
Yeah, just making little
It
eyes at each other.
felt like a scene which they created.
Mm.
And probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
I mean, you just like the whole film, so
Yes,
I don't
I
see.
love like I'm so unbiased, and this is part of the problem when I was watching this movie because I usually take notes and I like to see the themes and overarching themes, and so that I take notes and that we can discuss. It was very hard for me to separate myself from all the past times I've seen it and how much I actually love this movie. So, and then I decided 3 quarters down the line that it's probably not going to happen. I can't separate myself and my experience of enjoying and loving this movie. So I'm just going to bring it to the discussion. But yes, it felt a bit different trying to understand or analyze this when I actually am so close to it.
It's kind of a girl's film, isn't it, really? not for boys.
Yeah, because only girls can be romantic.
You know the song WAP was actually written about this film.
That's a lie.
That is a lie.
Okay.
It's yeah, it's I don't
But no, I was going to say the fact that the poem was the word they gave him was milkshake
that's so
irritated me
quirky.
from that's not quirky, that's very American in a very European movie.
Hmm.
No European person heard of milkshakes before like 15 years ago. Those are very American thing. We eat gelato, not milkshakes.
Okay.
So,
So,
so for me, it was like that was Linklater putting an Americanism into this movie, and from the first time, it's like, and the fact that she suggested not him, it's like, it somehow bothers me. But it's a cute poem.
it's an all right poem.
I mean, the poem, I like it because it reflects that idea which we're seeing throughout the movie of people discovering themselves and how self-discovery is better when there's someone to partner you. And in this movie, we see both characters going through that person, like a personal journey of self-discovery, but they are helping one another to create that personal self-discovery. I love when people are able to come together and help each other out to grow. It's magical. I love this movie.
Yeah, I think we get that at this
Yeah,
point.
well, I'm thinking of what else. The bus conversation was cute. Them asking questions to each other. That's a very that's very relatable to me. Usually, when I click with someone within the first few hours, I will be asking those silly questions that you would basically not consider normal conversation because they're random, but they help understand the person and they're goofy. And you actually get to know a different side to the person. So I loved that conversation as well.
But he's already got his arm around her. As soon as they're on the bus, he's like kind of up in her
Yeah,
personal
his
space.
first, yeah, and his first question is like, what was the first time a boy had a sexual interest in, or something like that? It's like, guys and sex meetings. He
It's a
could have
valid
asked about
question.
it is a valid question, and I would have asked it myself. But what you immediately get from that is like Ethan is already thinking, or Jesse is already thinking about sex.
Yeah, he's
He's not
very
thinking,
flirty from the off-go, and she's more
yes,
about
yes,
kind of trying to build a connection between them.
uh-huh.
And then he
Hmm.
kind of realizes that and matches her energy and steps back a bit. And
Yes.
then it's only later on when they're watching the sunset that they do kiss for the first time.
Yeah, that is a nice kiss though. Because afterwards they have this like cute hug, and it kind of reflects the kind of intimacy and connection that they have built, which we don't see in other characters in other movies. I love that scene. Oof, I want to criticize something about it. Like, I love this movie too much. I need to be like, that was horrible. He used too much tongue.
You criticized the milkshake thing. You made some pretty
Yeah.
cutting comments about
Wow.
that.
Wow.
So, and I feel like when the palm reader lady is kind of walking away from them, she's facing them and like backing onto the road. And I think if
Mm-hmm.
a car had come past and hit her in that moment, that would have been a
A
good
different
comedic
kind.
beat.
Yeah, and it would have been a different movie.
No, and then it's just never mentioned again. She
Oh,
just
okay, okay. She's just like swept away by a moving truck. And then
and
they're
then
like,
they just keep on
and
being cute with
continue.
each other. Yeah.
I feel like I've seen those kinds of movies, probably
Hey.
with you, but anyway.
Hey.
Then we get that amusement park scene. So they kiss on the wheel and Ferris wheel, which was pretty cute. And suddenly things shift. Before there's a lot of tension of are they actually going to try to be together? And suddenly like, okay, this is fully romantic now. So then you see a lot more intimacy and more touching and more than being cute. And then you also start to see a bit more tension of them challenging each other a bit.
She says in kind of a joking way, "Is this our first argument?"
No, he does. But he does tell her, like, it, when they were walking by the venue, was like, was that our first argument? And she was like, but people look down on conflict, and actually, a little bit of tension is important. And she is right. You see that when they interact, it's like they're pushing each other to think a bit differently. And that's why they also like each other. It's a two-way conversation. They found someone who's as intellectual and as sort of open as they are, and that's why they like one another.
Yeah, I guess the central question is this only this special amazing, precious thing because there is such a definite time limit on it, and they even
Hmm.
talk about it at certain points. Are they just going to end up like their parents if they stayed together long term? Are they going to find all these things they hate about each other? So is it better
Yeah,
because it's temporary,
because
or
and they mention it a couple of times during the movie that they're sort of in their own bubble, in their own time, sort of, and the atmosphere is very much that because they're two strangers, there is a time limit, and they're both in a city that they're not familiar with, and there's literally no one that knows them, and they're just drifting from one thing to the other, which creates this sense of isolation, sort of. And in fact, in the morning, he says like, we're back to normal time, something like that.
yeah, I was going to
Which
mention
kind
that.
of,
It's one of my favorite lines. And the other one
yeah,
is when they're doing the fake phone call bit, and she says, I like to feel his eyes on me when I look away. Oh,
yeah.
what are your favorite lines from this movie, Maria?
So that one is also a favorite of mine. But then I like the conversation they're having while they're walking, after the first bar where they're talking about past relationships, then they start talking about sort of how women view men and blah blah blah. And she says, I always feel this pressure of being a strong and independent icon of womanhood, and without making it look like my whole life is revolving around some guy. But loving someone and being loved means so much to me. I think I relate a lot to that quote because I think I spent a long time thinking that those two things are separate, that you should either be independent and strong and you don't need anyone. Now I've grown older and I think that you need both. Yeah, so it resonates with me. And it's part of the reason why the first time I watched it, I didn't relate a lot with Celine, but now as I've grown a bit older, I relate. And then she goes on to say, I believe if there's any kind of God, it wouldn't be in any of us, not you or me, but just in this little space in between. If there's any kind of magic in this world, it must be in the attempt of understanding someone, sharing something. And that for me is the best quote. Like that magic that transpires between the connection you create with other people.
I mean, now that you've finished quoting half of the film, yeah, she has some I think yeah, going back to the cynic and romantic thing, she does have lots of those little insights like that are quite
Hmm.
revealing and quite profound. And he's got some very, I don't know what you'd call them, like ideas that fall apart the if you try and think about them for more than a few seconds. Like the thing he's saying
Hmm.
about the island with 99 men and one woman
Yeah.
and one
Uh-huh.
woman and 99 women. It's like
Hmm.
the kind of stuff that you think as a teenager, really.
Yeah.
And he's
But I mean,
trying to be more real, but he ends up just kind of coming across as really cynical and derisive. And she's much more willing to think about these things in a more abstract way, I guess.
yeah. And I think she's also more willing to go where other people are afraid to go. It's hard for people to admit that love is actually a dissolution and love is something that we should all be craving for. It's especially, when you're young, you think you should be tougher than that.
Yeah, I relate
And
to that because if you have an armor of cynicism, it's kind of
mhm,
like protective in a way. If you're not being genuine, then no one can really hurt you because you've got this layer
mhm,
of irony separating you from reality. And I think that is kind of Ethan Hawke's character in a way.
uh-huh.
So it's kind of performative. I think he does believe a lot of what he says.
I think he is still a young person trying to discover the world, and he has built these ideas, knowing fully well that these ideas aren't really developed, but they help him go through the day. They help make the day fun and exciting and give him purpose. But then when he's confronted with sort of someone who's more real, more willing to go to a vulnerable place, he realizes, oh, And she designs them sort of.
And I used to be obsessed with bonobo monkeys as well. He has a long bit where he goes on about bonobo monkeys.
So that's
Because,
where you relate.
yeah, chimps have their whole society built around violence, and bonobos are
Mhm.
actually genetically closer to us than chimps. But
Yes,
because their society is based around sex, and the Victorians at the time were prudes, he couldn't really accept sex as a natural, normal thing.
yeah.
It was very much like a closed off thing between a man and a wife. Then they said, "Oh, well, we're obviously based on the violent apes and not the sexy apes."
Sexy.
So
Yeah, we studied them. It's true. We studied them in evolution psychology, and it's also that bonobos are mainly matriarchal, which again, in those times wasn't something acceptable or even human-like at all. So, of course, again, the wrong assumption that we're clearly nothing like bonobos. We are patriarchal and therefore more like chimps.
and
But yes,
feminism was invented by men as well.
in what way?
That's what she says. That's what your favorite character in this film says.
Yes, and I get what she's saying. I to an extent I agree with what she's saying, but she's probably phrasing it from the point of view of someone who's in the 90s and the literature then catches up to that idea. But yes, that is belief within certain streams of feminism that sexual liberation as part of the feminist movement actually benefits men more than it benefits women. But that is a whole, I could literally have a podcast on just that topic. And I've spent hours discussing that specific topic with different women in my life. There are different takes on it. But she is partly right. But it's an underdeveloped idea.
Full of underdeveloped ideas, this film.
Because they are underdeveloped people. They are in their early 20s, being extra romantic and cute. Because remember also the idea that you don't have to meet this person. That's what I mean, that you're literally inventing a whole persona. You really love them together. But ultimately, there's also a question of are you really seeing the true, honest, authentic selves? Or are they portraying someone that is very lovable because they want the other character to like them?
Yeah, like we have no reason to believe that either of them are telling the truth, really. Like Ethan
Exactly.
Hawke could just be interrailing around Europe as a serial killer, just
Mhm.
trapping random women and killing them.
So why do we believe it then?
He's a very charismatic actor. I think Richard Linklater did the same kind of thing he did with Matthew McConaughey in Dazed and Confused, where he just found him, just saw like a attractive man who was quite good at acting and said, I want that one, and then put him in all
So
his
it's
films.
purely so it's purely because he's attractive and charismatic that we believe them.
No, okay, fine. Yeah, at the start he's very much trying to come onto her quite heavily, and he is a bit performative, but then you do see vulnerability as the film
Hmm.
goes on. Because no matter how much of that exterior you can build up, eventually the real person inside is going to start
Yeah.
to peek through.
And I think we see a little bit of that when, first of all, when they go to the coffee shop and they have that pretend call to their friends back home. And that is the first time you see them confessing some kind of feeling towards each other. So that's another crack in the facade. But also, they start having the conversation of what do we do now? We clearly like each other a lot. There's a connection that doesn't happen often. What is are we saying bye tomorrow? And at first, there's the boat scene where they say, okay, we'll say bye now, knowing that we're not going to see each other again because long distance doesn't work and some things are special because there is a time limit. But then later on, you see the desperation of like, no, no, I don't want this to end. And that is more human. You know what I mean? It's like when something is really good, it's hard to make it stop, even though in an abstract term, it's more romantic that this has an ending. And that I think for me is where you see the proper facade going away. And that's why it makes you believe that all the while they were real.
If they were in an age of smartphones and social media, do you think they would have added each other on Instagram and started messaging each other?
So this is hard for me to answer because I've seen the next two movies in this trilogy. I'm guessing you haven't.
No, I have not.
So I know what I believed the first time I saw it without knowing what happened. And then I actually saw them, so I know what happens. So that's a hard question. But if I were to answer, if I had just seen the first one, I would have told you that somehow they would have put any kind of effort to maintain the relationship. So yes, in the age of social media, they would have maybe tried to talk to each other on Instagram or chat.
Well, they do
And
mention, didn't they? They talk about like, oh, we could write each other, we could call each other, and they're like, no, that's not.
but
That would ruin this.
yes, I agree with that. But that was a different thing at the time. At the time, people didn't rely on phones and letters. They would actually meet up because those kinds of modes of communication weren't very reliable, accessible, or I mean, no one really. The world was much smaller back then. You actually met with your friends or your partner on a regular basis. I'm thinking like when I was really, really young. I remember calling my friends and talking to them over the phone for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. But the reality is, I wouldn't rely on that most of the time. I relied on that when I couldn't go out with them. So I'm guessing it's probably like they're not used to that kind of communication and that they know it's kind of like not going to compare to what they just had. But if they were kids, whether they were in their early 20s in 2024, then yes, they would have had Instagram and WhatsApp and completely built a long-term relationship or tried to build a long-term relationship on social media and the internet. So,
This should be a segment. Maria's on
yeah.
a soapbox. Maltese grandma complains about smartphones. Hey,
I
they're
should,
called
like,
smartphones, but they're actually
yeah.
kind of making us dumber, don't you think?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I should also premise I'm 31 years old. I'm not 80 years old, okay? I just sometimes have beliefs of an 80-year-old, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Also, going back to that coffee shop, I loved that scene because when I was in Vienna, all the really good coffee shops are like that. So, like, immediately took me back. But I think we get one of the only funny scenes, which is we get a lot of like snippets of conversations happening in mostly Austrian, but other languages. And then they cut to which you're wondering what they're saying. And then they cut to the American couples, like the service is horrible. It's like those are so they're very American and they're funny compared to everyone else.
Ethan Hawke is a very American character. He feels lifted. He feels like a character from Slacker or Dazed and Confused. He's a bit older and
Yes,
has
yes.
gone on a gap year. I mean, he's literally called
Mm-hmm.
Jesse James, so that's
Yeah.
Richard Linklater
Very American.
being very on the nose again. He's in like Converse and
Mm-hmm.
blue jeans and a leather jacket. Thinks
Yeah.
he's a rebel without a
And
cause.
yeah, and he also captures that kind of people also want to travel and explore and broaden their mind. But then they actually go and realize how small-minded they are. And we get that a little bit with him of sort of I'm on an adventure, I'm different, but I want to be cool. And I mean, I think the first few scenes, she tells him, "Oh, how do you speak English?" And so I'm American. Oh, really? Because he's such a he sticks out like a sore thumb, more like the American on a European train.
I like that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's more self-aware than I think we've seen Richard Linklater be so far.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's the bit with the Germans as well, where they kind of start to try and do this thing where they pretend they're on their honeymoon, and the Germans are just having
Mm-hmm.
none of it whatsoever. No, you're
Mm-hmm.
not, are you? That's just bullshit. They should have gone to that play, man. The play sounded better than this film.
I always say we should have seen the play, and I always wonder why were we given so much detail about the play and then not it's being referred to except or in the end where they say, "Oh, we didn't go to the play."
It would be very Shakespearean to have a play within a play. I'm surprised Richard Linklater
Yes.
didn't get that self-indulgent and start doing that. He would have loved it as well. He would
Also.
have it would have just been 10 minutes real time of the play. He would have cut to people in the audience
Hmm.
watching the play and they'd never actually show you the play and they'd
Yeah.
make us watch people watching something.
And I think they want to give us this idea of like it being a terrible play and actually making fun of that play, which is a universal experience, sort of like being stuck in a horrible play and you're just enjoying the fact that it's horrible.
Do you remember that
Hmm.
play we watched about global warming?
Yes. It's exactly that kind of experience of like going there. At first, the first 5 minutes, I'm like, okay, I'm going to give this, I'm open-minded. Let's see where this goes. And then the next 15 minutes, like, I think it's really bad, but I don't, like, I'm not sure it's that bad. Is it that bad? And then, like, within 30 minutes, yes, it is this bad. Okay, I just need to relax and enjoy how horrible it is. And then it's fun again.
Yeah, and there's the thing with a play like that as well, where you have to sit there in silence that you don't really know if the person you're with is enjoying it, so you don't want to
You're
ruin it
next
for
to is
them.
thinking,
And then but you also like want to kind of
yeah.
nudge them and be like, "This isn't very good, is it?"
Like exactly. And then when the lights come back up, it's like you look at each other and within seconds you know. And it's like, okay, that was a shared experience. It was not great. But it would have been better if we knew during because we could have commented. It's happened to me a couple of times, but probably that was a good memorable one.
So
Anyway.
they should have gone to the play. Would have been a better movie. Might have
It's
liked
not
it.
a better movie. It's not a better. We've had better outings than that play, but that
It's
play
true.
was fun. I would also say the park scene. Did they sleep with each other or not? That is also a question.
Oh, I think they would have
That
been
movie.
arrested if they slept with each other. It's public indecency.
Yeah, they would also. Yeah, I think they're also the first couple to ever sleep with each other in a public park. That has never happened.
Well, morally, I cannot agree. Another
Thankfully,
thing that
we're not.
offended me more was the fact they just leave their wine bottle on the glasses there.
Yeah, like that's trash. You should have picked it up and took it. Yes, I know.
I find it very hard to root for
I
such
mean,
immoral
also,
characters.
and also, did he ever actually really pay for the wine bottle? Did he send the money? Because he tells him, you give me your address and I send you the money." But we never actually see him taking down the address.
That's why I picture the sequel is. I picture this bartender gets like that scam pulled on him like 20 times a night, and eventually he
Hmm.
goes bankrupt and he has to shut down his bar. And he
Hmm.
remembers back to the first guy who did it to him, Jesse James, and he tracks him down. It's kind of a John Wick style thriller of this
Okay, I was thinking
bartender
taken.
coming to America and tracking him down to get
Sure,
his wine
sure,
bottle
yes.
back. And it
Yes, that
finishes with him
sounds.
like stuffing a wine bottle down his throat and suffocating him.
And do you
That's what
think
happens
so?
in the second film, right?
And do you think Celine is still in the sequel? Oh, the sequel, or is she just gone?
That's an interesting question.
So let me actually go back to the actual movie, okay? So do you think, and that is the question that really stops the movie or like ends the movie, so do you think they actually meet up? Because they end up making plans of let's meet in 6 months.
Well, the little I do know is that it's a trilogy and there's like 9 to 10 years between each one.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd assume they don't meet up and start a relationship. So I'd say in the second one, either they just meet by chance 10 years later, and it's either that they did meet in 6 months or just one of them went after 6 months, but nothing
Mm-hmm.
happened beyond that. It was just that one thing, and either they didn't meet or the magic wasn't quite there in the same way, and they kind of went their separate ways, and then they just happened to meet 10
Mm-hmm.
years later.
I know exactly what happens, but
Well,
when
yeah,
I
yeah.
saw it the first time,
It's not impressive. I've just not seen the
when
film, man.
no, I'm not saying, but I'm trying not to give any spoilers. That's what I'm doing. When I saw it the first time, I was very hopeful and I did say they must meet. But at the same time, I was also very realistic of like if they meet, it will fizzle out. It's not realistic that they will stay together. They're too young, their lives are completely separate. He will annoy her with his Americanisms. She will annoy him because she's French and idealistic. So that was my belief. But also, like, I went and looked up what Richard Linklater and everyone involved in the project thought, and because they didn't know they were going to make the second or third movie, and they all fully believed that they would have met up again.
Well, it's based on a real thing that happened to Richard Linklater, and in real
Is it?
life,
I didn't know
in
that.
real life, he did have this night with this woman he met, and she died quite near to the release of this film. I'm assuming they
It's more
don't
tragic.
continue that into the film because I've seen
Was
the
this you
posters and they're
like?
both on it, unless she's a ghost or something. But I think that's
That's so tragic. Was that you trying to sabotage like my basically enjoying this movie and having no complaints about it?
yeah, it's based on a real encounter Richard Linklater had with a woman he met in a toy shop in 1989, and she did die shortly before the film was released.
She could have seen the movie and be fallen in love with Linklater all over again, but she didn't because she died.
Maybe he killed her because she was going to sue him
Okay,
for
yeah,
using what happened in real
yeah.
life.
That is actually the sequel. It is Ethan Hawke's character killing Julie Delpy's character.
It's probably not this, but I think Richard Linklater is the kind of person to have in the world of the film. Ethan Hawke is like a successful film director who's made a film about the encounter that they've had, and he's now got a film
Mm,
career based on that. And she like meets him at
mm.
the premiere or something.
I think you're not admitting to the fact that you actually know a little bit about what's going to happen in the sequel.
I don't. Is that genuinely what happens?
No, it's not what happens, but it's close to what happens when
I
you
know
actually
you,
watch it.
Linklater. I know you are self-indulgent. The
Anymore.
Linklater is actually a verb. It means to be self-indulgent.
Uh-huh, sure.
And he really
According.
Linklated all over this film, didn't he?
I'm
Take your time. Start over again, Bob.
Hey, what are you saying?
What are you saying, Jeff?
What are you saying, Spot? What are you saying?
What are you saying?
What are you saying? I don't know what he's saying.
What are you saying? What are you saying? Nigel, what are you saying?
I'm saying groovy.
Yeah, so this film is very different from the first two that we watched, which to be fair were quite
Mhm,
different from each other as well. But if we are talking about director trademarks, I think
mhm.
there's some talk about conspiracy theories. He's still on about all that bullshit.
Uh-huh.
He's talk about this idea that the generation in the 90s don't have this big cause or this big war or this purpose, and they're kind of lost and searching for their own meaning within life. And this idea of
Yeah, I
is a
think.
fantasy better than reality as well?
What do you mean by the fantasy better reality in terms of this movie?
That's kind of the main crux of their conversation, isn't it? Is this special because
It's not real.
there's all this potential and all these
Mm.
possibilities that if we actually lived it, then it would be one certain path. But because it's so open-ended and short, there's more to it.
I think they allude to it in the movie when, in the beginning, Ethan Hawke says like couples end up hating each other over time. But then she, and later, almost at the end, she says, "I think I can only fall in love with someone when I truly know everything about them." And I think that answers it. I think that was okay. The premise of the movie is this special because it's just fleeting. But I think then Celine gives us the answer. Like, actually, we fall in love with people when we really, really get to know them. So, what we're seeing here is the budding of something. I think this movie also captures this idea that we don't get these kinds of connections with anyone. They're special. And I know a lot of us have never had that kind of connection. I've been lucky to have it. I know it's lucky because it doesn't happen often. And for some people, it never happens. And this movie is magical because it captures that.
Yeah, it's a pretty film. I'll give it that.
Pretty is a bit condescending, but
It's not
okay.
condescending.
It's like, oh, that's a pretty girl. That's a pretty dress she's wearing.
What is if you deliver it like that? I
Okay,
was
okay, fair
being
enough.
genuine, and I really like at the end when they've left on the train, and it just cuts back to all the places they visited,
The
and they're kind of
places.
empty in the early hours of the
Mm-hmm.
morning. That's a big theme
Mm-hmm.
as well about this idea that cemeteries and churches and canals have power, and they all mean different things to different generations of people.
And then suddenly you get to see these empty spaces, which before we saw them holding all of everything and the same. Suddenly they're less, but there's the ghost of what just happened, and it's pretty. And then lose your word.
There you go, I told you, pretty. It's not condescending. So
Yes, yes. Oh, I used it's not condescending as well. It's pretty.
the one part where I don't really like Ethan Hawke is when he's talking
Mm-hmm.
about that story of his friend like offering the homeless guy $100 bill, asking him if he believes in God, and when he says no, he's like wrong answer, and they drive off. That's I
Uh-huh.
didn't
Yeah,
quite get the
yeah.
purpose of that scene because it kind of seems deliberately to make him look like a bit of a dick.
I think the reason being is there are pockets in time in the movie that they want us to feel like these characters are actually credible. So we see that from him, we see her maybe exposing herself as being a bit of a needy girlfriend, of loving, she was accused by her ex of loving him too much or being too much. So we get to see pockets in time where actually we see flaws in the character of like these are not perfect people, and they're actually allowing each other to know that they're not perfect people. Like if you were to meet someone and not care and about anything, you would lie. You wouldn't need to say any of anything that would make you look less than. And they don't do that. They find small things that they confide within one another that show that this I sometimes fuck up. I'm not a perfect human.
Yeah, I guess it adds to their believability. There's the bit where she's
Mm-hmm.
talking about her ex and how her psychologist reported her to the police because
Yeah.
she was kind of joking about wanting to murder him and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And it does
She didn't
show
joke she wanted to murder him. She wrote a story about a fictional character who murders her boyfriend.
it was kind of the same thing in it, really.
Yeah. I know. But I mean, as a therapist, I would view them as differently as well. I mean, joking about something is different than writing a fictional story. Yes, that's her telling him, Isma, I do have a tendency to overreact, to get a bit enthralled into any kind of situation I'm in. She tells him he called me like I'm too much, that she invested a lot in someone who is not a good person, as she says, and why do we waste time with not the right people? That's her being vulnerable and telling him, Isma, I don't make perfect choices, I fuck up, and I hope you don't get scared by that part of.
We have to rank it now. Thinker,
Okay.
linker, stinker. I think I added funker. So you're welcome to add. It has to be vaguely a pun on the name
Mhm.
Linklater. Oh, we should have called it Link Hater. Are you a Link Hater?
No,
No, not for this film,
that's
but that should be the question we're asking. So, what did you think of this film? I would love to know because you've given me no impression so far.
No. It's such a spoiler what I'm about to say, but basically, definitely a thinker. It made me think a lot about a lot of different things, and definitely a linker. It's a good movie for Richard Linklater. I would also say no, I can't say it, so no. I won't.
No,
I
go on,
won't.
go on.
I was going to try to say brilliant and link. Like, I can't. My tongue can't do it right now.
Brilliantator.
I can't.
Brilliantator.
I can't.
Brilliantator.
Bri-
Kind of sounds like a very rude word.
You were going to tell me your ranking.
Was I?
Yes.
Probably the same. Probably the same.
What? What?
Well, I'm not gonna give
Okay,
it
it's
a stinker, am I? It's not a bad film. It's a very pretty, well-made film. Some of the dialogue is kind of a bit navel-gazy and first time smoking weed, student
Mm-hmm.
conversation kind of stuff, but that's kind of the
Yeah.
point.
Point.
They're supposed to be young people who are still figuring life out, and they are putting up facades and performances, but you do also get to see through that eventually. They kind of
Mm-hmm.
wear down and see the real people
Yeah.
underneath, or the real characters. How do you say her name? Julie Delphi?
I don't know. I kept saying Julie Delphi, but I think
Julie?
I butchered it. But I
Factor into my
didn't think.
rating. I didn't personally find it that attractive, but
She's literally a doll.
said
She's so pretty. Okay, you don't agree. Whatever. You have a right to disagree,
I
but
mean,
she's
she's kind of
so pretty.
attractive in like a supermodel way, where she's too perfect and alien. Ethan Hawke is very cool, like his little Converse. I used to have Converse. Probably, if I'd watched this at the age of 18, I'd be like that
You would
meme
aspire
of
to be like him.
idolizing the wrong people.
I don't think I idolize any of them, but I mean, they're pretty people, they're pretty actors. But that's beside the point. You just admitted that you liked this movie.
I
So
never
you
said I
spent,
didn't.
no, you never said you did, but Jesus, do you like to fight every idea? Eh? Okay, I will take this as a win. At least we're pretty much on the same page for the first time over one movie.
Yeah, and I should say this is kind of unusual because I don't really like straight up romance
I think it's not.
movies, mostly pure
I
romance
know.
movies. I think the only one really is Eternal Sunshine, and that's
It's
not really a
perfect.
straight up romance movie. It's got
No,
other stuff going on.
but
Well,
it is
this
an
is
incredible
just a
movie.
man and a woman talking.
It's basically a man and a woman slowly falling in love. I mean, that is pure romance. There's nothing real comedy. There's nothing, anything else happening in the plot. There's no real other drama. But anyway, you're on the same page as I am. That for me is a win. I can close off and take this to the grave, okay?
Well, I'm gonna go pure linker because I think it
Okay.
obviously links to the other two films. It links to Ethan Hawke's career,
I mean, this is the
and
first time
they
it's
done a little kiss.
is this what do you mean?
They did a little kiss. Great, nice.
They did more than just a little. They did a first kiss, then they kissed on the park again. And you still wonder if they did have sex or not. Is this the first Ethan Hawke movie ever?
No, it's one of the
Oh,
first, but he was.
uh-huh.
I think Richard Linklater saw him in the play and cast him based off of that.
And we will definitely see a long-standing relationship between Linklater and Ethan Hawke in future movies. What's the next movie, Joe?
Well, this is interesting because I thought it was going to be a clear shot to Before Sunset. Is that the next one in this?
Uh-huh.
But it turns out there are actually, and I didn't realize this until I looked it up, there are like 5 films in between this and
Yeah.
Before Sunset.
Yeah,
And one of
that's it.
them is School of Rock.
Yes!
Thank God.
My inner teenager loves that movie, okay? So
I
anyway,
forgot
but that's
that
a
Richard Linklater did School of Rock.
yes, that is the first ever movie I watched about from Richard Linklater, School of Rock. It's a classic.
So when you
Anyway,
watched Before Sunrise, you thought it was going to be Jack Black
no, I
committing
didn't
fraud
realize.
against vulnerable children.
No, I didn't realize the first time I saw Before Sunrise, I didn't realize that the same person did the two. But later on, I realized I looked up
Linklater.
Richard Linklater's filmography and realized, oh, he actually did School of Rock.
It's an insane career, though, to go from
It is.
Slacker
It
to
is.
Dazed and Confused to Before Sunrise and then end up in School of Rock in the space of
Yeah,
about
and
10 years.
I wonder why. But we're also starting to see making more money. Let's be realistic. This was a 2.5 million movie that made 22.5 million at the time, which is little, but for an indie movie, it made a lot.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
very
was
good.
yeah,
For a film that's
and
just 2 people talking. Like
exactly.
films that make money usually have stakes, you know, action films,
Yeah.
people's lives are at stake. What's at stake here? Just whether these 2 people fall in love or not. Yeah, great.
Hey, broken hearts have ruined many lives, okay? So anyway, but what I'm trying to say is that now he's getting a bit of notoriety. So I'm sure big productions are approaching him.
You would think. But the next film is called, we don't have to do it to be fair, because it's based on a play, but it's called Suburbia. It's 2 hours long and it all happens outside a convenience store.
Oh, wow.
I've never
Do you
seen it.
think,
I know nothing about it
yeah.
apart from the information I just gave you.
Do you think we should stick to the actual filmography? Or, I mean,
It's up to you.
how would you have done it?
Well, I would have done the one
Yeah.
about plowing fields and reading books.
I mean, we could, but now we're doing it retrospectively. If it's really
From the
bad, then it's really bad.
description, it sounds like
Mhm.
Clerks, which is weird because Clerks was kind of based off of Slacker. Kevin Smith got the inspiration for Clerks from Slacker, and now Richard
Mhm.
Linklater is doing a film that's Clerks.
Let's get. Don't like doing this. I like the movie to speak to me.
I'm interested that it's the first one he hasn't written himself as well, so it's just
What's the one after then?
It's called The Newton Boys. Again, I've never heard of it, but it's got
No,
Matthew
neither have
McConaughey, Ethan Hawke, Vincent D'Onofrio, and it's
Okay,
based
so
on a
he has
book and
his
it's about
favorite
a
boys.
gang.
That sounds interesting. Okay, don't tell me more. Anyway, we'll do Disturbia and then we'll do that.
Disturbia?
No, what is it?
Suburbia. But the U is capital. I don't know if that comes into play.